whatever part of freedom you're fighting for, that's what we want. We want freedom. And ultimately, it's one thing, because we have a secret governance system that's trying to assert more and more central control, and we all feel it, even though we're pushing back. So what is happening is a process began in the 90s where the central bankers said, currently the central bankers run monetary policy, the money supply, the currency. But the people's representatives, whether it's the legislature or the executive branch, run fiscal policy. So that's setting the taxes, collecting the taxes, spending the tax money. And the bankers said, let's have a financial coup and use digital technology and take over fiscal policy as well. So bankers can run monetary and fiscal policy. And the way they're doing this is by moving to an all digital financial system where you can use what's called programmable money. Some people have heard of central bank digital currency. That's a kind of programmable money. But let's talk about our current system. In our current system, we have what I call two-lock money. So you're a buyer, I'm a seller, we transact, and I have a lock. If you say no, transaction doesn't happen. If I say no, transaction doesn't happen. Now, financial institutions can intercede with money laundering regulations or know your customer or other sort of rules, but basically the transaction is going quickly and we're the only people who can stop it, okay? They want to move to a system called three-lock money. That's programmable money. There's you and there's me, and then there's Mr. Global's complex algorithm backed up by all those wonderful data centers, right? And Mr. Global gets a say on every transaction. So if Mr. Global says you can't leave your 15-minute city, your money won't transact outside of your 15-minute city. So it's got spatial control, it's got all sorts of medical and food control. So if I'm interested in medical freedom, why do I care? And that's because we can pass all the federal, state, and local laws we want saying we're free to do whatever we want. We're free to say no to a health mandate. And that may be, state may protect our religious exemption or our ability to not comply with a mandate. But literally, if the banks turn off your money and say, well, if you don't comply, we're going to turn off your money. State won't force you to do it, but you won't be able to transact in the general financial system. Now, this includes your financial assets because they're now saying they want to issue digital tokens on your financial assets in a way that they're on a distributed ledger and they can make them programmable. So last year we passed the Genius Act, which is an act describing the regulatory framework for stablecoins, which to be used as a currency. Right now, we have Congress negotiating the Clarity Act, and the Clarity Act describes digital tokens. And what we know is that Wall Street and the banking system want to use digital tokens to trade all the other assets, both real assets like your house or your stocks and bonds. And what they've said is they want to move all the stocks and bonds in the world onto a distributive ledger, which gives them then the ability to make it programmable. And the Bank of International Settlements, which has been running the process on central bank digital currency, has announced it's making an inventory of all the assets in the world. And they want to be able to trade all assets with a digital token. One of the creepiest things I've ever heard was a software developer bragging about how cool this was, because you could go to the grocery store and pay for your groceries with 0.01% of your house equity. So here's what's very confusing. If you look at the debate about the Clarity Act, it's still not clear to me exactly how they're proposing the system is going to work. And if you read all the different sort of things that can be found on what they're proposing, I think it's still very fluid. So you just need to remember. Now, DTC is basically the archive of who owns what stock and bonds, and it runs that process for $114 trillion of stocks and bonds. DTC has just announced, even though the Clarity Act hasn't finalized yet, that they're launching their distributed ledger system to trade everything with tokens, along with 50 major financial institutions. So this is moving very, very quickly. And Washington now is in deep debate about the details of how this is going to work. But what is important for people listening to know is financial system, which is no longer going to be financial system as we know it. It's a control system. And what you do is you do everything to slow them down or stop them. Because this is a vision that if the bankers control fiscal policy, that is the end of taxation with representation. That is the end of the Constitution. So the other thing we need to do is make sure the system never goes all digital. So we've been working for years to promote cash and to help people understand, start today, use cash as you can. And cash is becoming in many places more popular particular. One, we're dealing with inflation, which is likely to get worse, and cash is a way to protect yourself because the fees are really draining a big portion of the GDP in a place. But the other thing is there have been so many natural disasters where if people didn't have cash, they were in real trouble. The leaders of ending cash have been the Scandinavian central banks. And after several disasters, including the floods in eastern Tennessee and North Carolina, the Scandinavian central banks came out and said, it was a mistake to have cash. We can't trust that electricity is always going to work. We need cash. And I think there's a lot of young people who've had it with the encroachment of the surveillance and the digital control. And the programmable money and the digital control grid depend on three pillars to execute. One is the programmable money, and that's why you see the Clarity Act and this other legislation happening. The second is the digital ID, which they tried to use the vaccine to implement. But the third thing is you need all the local surveillance and hardware. And as the flock cameras and the state, the override of local telecommunication and the data centers are going in, people are going like, what is this? Right. And I don't know if you've been watching the debate on the kill switch in the cars. Somebody just told me a story. It happened to somebody in Europe. Their car stalled out and wouldn't start. And they got a voice that said, I can't see your eyes. It was spooky. So as the hardware rolls out, people can see it. If I'm talking about money or digital ID, they can't see it the way they can see a flock camera or they can see a data center suck up. They're installing one of the largest so far in Utah, and the projected energy use is ultimately, when it's at full capacity, is 3 times the entire energy now used by the state of Utah. So if you look at what they project in terms of energy need or water need or other minerals and metals, I don't see how they get there. But the other thing is, if you look at the size that they're projecting in terms of data capacity, one of my questions, and I have no idea of knowing the answer, are the U.S. data centers meant to handle U.S. programmable money and control, or is it global money and control? Because if you're pushing out digital tokens and you're pushing out stable coins to the whole world, they may be trying the whole world in the system. If you look at all the people who are building the control grid, we are. So we're financing it. People are going to building the different pieces and the component parts. And, we look at our friends who are building it and we think they would never do that. And it's true. They would never do that. They don't see where the system's going. And part of the reason is if you're a healthy, grounded person, very hard for you to understand or relate to the fact that there's a certain portion of the people in the world who have no empathy. Whether you want to call them psychopaths or they've functioned at an elite status and have just gotten divorced from the general population, whatever it is, you can't fathom that anybody would want to load digital material into your body and hook you up to the internet on a surveillance basis. They can't fathom that. Now, I can fathom that because I've worked there and I can connect the dots between what's happening. So when I was on Wall Street, there was a theory that you could make enough money and then you could protect yourself from the central control, and it was true. The more they centralize with digital technology, the smaller that group gets. And you go through all these waves of people who think they're insiders, and then suddenly, we re-engineer and, millions of insiders get thrown on, it tightens up, and it just keeps moving up and tightening up. And everybody's trying to scramble to get into that smaller and smaller group. And that's part of what you're watching with the global competition. And one of the reasons that I sort of walked out and went into the wilderness is I said, we need to create a culture of people who are not trying to get the next Petri to get up the ladder and are going to start to build something that's a real civilization. Because, this scramble up to the top, never. The question is when you're going to get dunked out, not if. So here's the thing. That's a complex topic. I run an investment screen. So I have 2 companies. One is an investment screen. So there are periods when if you're not in the momentum, you're going to be out of the index. But I also think if you know what you're doing and you know how the world works, there are plenty of ways to make plenty of money without financing the control grid. So here's the thing. The control grid right now is going to be the index. And if you look at managers who outperform the index, traditionally, and I'm using an old statistic, 24% of the managers beat the index, but they're out of sync with the index, and they can underperform the index as much as 2.5 years. So if you want to be with the index, you're going to be financing the control grid if you want to match the index. But let me tell you, I was an investment advisor for 10 years. The way that I saw the most families make money was not on their investments. It was first they would raise healthy kids. They would teach them lots of great skills, get them great education, and they would build family enterprises. And those enterprises is where they made their big capital gains. So if you want to make real wealth in America, you want to build enterprise or be part of building enterprise. And it's really funny because I would fight with my partners all the time who would say, we should be doing more. And I said, you mean you want me to stop investing in you and Solari and start investing in crypto instead? Really? Is that what you want? Because, great enterprise goes like this for a long time and then it goes up. And if you're sitting here comparing yourself to, I could make more money in Bitcoin as you're bumping along the bottom, you're never going to get to that real wealth creation.